We're diving into a story that's literally causing waves off the coast of Britain and for our national security. One of Vladimir Putin's nuclear subs was recently detected off the coast of Scotland, triggering apparently an emergency meeting with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Defence Secretary Grant Shapps. Now, this what's called, I think, Yasin-class submarine, capable of launching lots of cruise missiles, was closely monitored by RAF. Surveillance planes probably happens all the time. Now, is this a threat? Is this just another story to distract us from a failurous Tory election campaign? Who better to talk with us than Warren Thornton? Warren, good to see you again. How was your weekend?
Absolutely fabulous weekend. Better than the people at the G7 or the peace conference, I think.
I think that apart from Joe Biden, who won't remember being there, everyone else seemed to be having a roaring time. And Rishi Sunak didn't leave early. What has the G7 summit in Italy got, which the Normandy ceremony didn't have, Warren?
Well, there's sort of two sides, because the peace conference and the G7 were going at the same time. In the peace conference, China and Russia didn't attend. And Australia sent their disabilities minister, which tells you everything you need to know. The G7, Trudeau shouting out Slava Ukraine, which of course we know is a neo-Nazi term that was first in 1922, and then Stepan Bandera adopted it. And of course, he killed many Poles and many Jews throughout his reign of terror. We have Maloney turning around and saying, we will force Russia to surrender. We have to remind the Italians the last time they won a war on their own was in the 30s when they invaded Albania and Ethiopia. And they've said that they're not sending any troops, so they want Eastern Europe to fight. And of course, we have Macron turning around and said, we've only ever wanted peace. But that's not true, Lembit, because you and I have seen the paperwork.
Well, yes, they're working on that. That's definitely a work in progress. Lot to cover there. Just in terms of, let's try and, I don't know if we get through all of this, but let's try and talk submarines, peace talks, ironically, I think, and then the third matter as well. But let's start with the submarine. This submarine, which has been lurking around in the North Sea, well, I don't think this is particularly unusual, is it? Is this just a general election story?
It is a general election story. Nuclear submarines quite constantly patrol the waters of various other countries. They also let other countries know when they move from international waters into their waters that they're there. So the British would have been absolutely aware. The Russians would have made certain of it. If you want a submarine story, then the latest launch of the brand new Russian submarine, Archangel, would be the one that you would really be worried about, because that has the capabilities of firing nuclear hypersonic weapons from that submarine, first one ever.
I've been super impressed with some of the submarine hardware of Russia. They built the fastest military submarine ever, I seem to remember. 58 knots, that's about almost 70 miles per hour underwater. Woe betide a fish that gets in the way of that. So we don't need to be particularly concerned about the fact that submarines are there. Why are they making a big deal about it then? Is it just to try and make Sunak seem tough?
It's not only that. I believe also it's to scare up, because Stoltenberg has just come out and said that he wants NATO to go basically to to start climbing up the DEFCON scale. To get nuclear weapons ready. Now, that submarine would play brilliantly into that, wouldn't it? Stoltenberg came out and made a statement saying that NATO should be nuclear ready, which means going up through the DEFCON scale, which is a very, very bad idea.
Well, tying into, and from that, we move seamlessly to the ironically named Peace Summit about Ukraine, which you mentioned, Warren. I don't understand how you can have a peace summit when one of the main protagonists, Russia, isn't invited.
Simply, you can't. What it is, it's an attempt at bullying, basically. It's here's what we've decided, here's what you will do. And Russia will not have a bar of it. And Russia are not going to relinquish any of the territory they currently hold. And of course, as the war goes on and Russia keep winning, you only negotiate from a position of strength, which NATO and Ukraine don't have. So the Russian peace terms are going to get harsher and harsher and harsher, and we're just going to get a bigger and bigger and bigger divide. This whole thing is a complete sham, then.
Is it like a situation where you're thinking of buying something, the West thinking of buying peace, we dither, and when we go back, the price has gone up?
That's the one. That's the one, and it was on the table when Boris Johnson scuppered it. And so bad is it now in Ukraine that they're using a very nasty tactic to get 16, 17 and 18-year-olds in, because what they do at college is they get them to write down that they are reservists. And if you're a reservist, it doesn't matter what age you are eligible for the draft.
That's not very widely reported in the UK. I've seen something about it. Now, somebody in Ukraine Security Council said that if Putin's faced a defeat, desertions, protests in Moscow, then he'd resort to a tactical nuclear weapon. Is this just scaremongering?
You have to, in part, 50% of it is, but some of these people are serious. I mean, at the end of the day, remember, the American warhawks are very, very serious, because if NATO and Russia fire off at each other, there's nothing left, and it's a win-win for America. So they're quite happy to push that agenda, because it takes care of what was the burgeoning EU bloc as a superpower. And then that just leaves them and China, and we all know that they're ramping up for a confrontation with China anyway.
Even though China's probably building the hardware they're going to use against China. I wonder if there'd be anything in the microchips that might make that difficult. Rhetorical, but if you are in China, do let us know first here at today's News Talk. You'll find a phone number you can get us on. The whole debate about the Ukraine situation seems to revolve around saber rattling, and G7 leaders were warning last week that any use of chemical or biological nuclear weapons would meet a strong response. It seems to be upscaling the arguments. It seems to be increasing the bluster from potentially beleaguered Western leaders at the G7 who are trying to get re-elected. Or am I being cynical?
No, you're not being cynical at all. And all the time that you have this rhetoric going around, remember The Guns of August, which was a great book written about World War One, where people like Jean-Jacques were asking for peace, and they ended up getting assassinated. Now, we've seen people wanting peace getting assassinated. We've seen Fico, an attempted assassination. We've seen others get assassinated. What we have is this rolling ball. And then eventually one side mobilises and another side mobilises, and before you know it, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Now, for election purposes, you can scaremonger left, right and centre, but the big thing in Great Britain is going to be immigration. It's as simple as that.
Meanwhile, Russia's also incidentally being accused of a Cuban Missile Crisis Part 2 in 1962. There's a big standoff, I haven't got time to explain it now, between JFK, John F. Kennedy, US President, and Nikita Khrushchev, the Russian Soviet premier, when he was trying to base nuclear weapons in Cuba. Now, there's a talk about some military vessels heading towards Cuba again. Is this just all part of the same spin?
No, there is a nuclear submarine, and there are 3 or 4 flotillas gone there. And of course, America have ramped up their presence. Let's not forget, in '62, there was a Russian submarine commander when they were forced to the surface who prevented a nuclear outbreak then, because an American plane flew over the top of the submarine. And one of the commanders wanted to launch, but the other captain, a guy called Arkov, actually stopped him from launching because they thought they were under attack, but that plane shouldn't have been in that area. It was a complete accident that it was. And that's how that's how easy it is to start one of these.
Last of all, Trump has been saying that every time Zelensky comes to America, he goes away with $60 billion, then he gets home 4 days later, he wants another $60 million. Is it your impression that Trump could be the great presidential hope that de-escalates the whole thing?
He's got to, because Biden won't stop. Let's not forget here, the West cannot walk away from this, and the only way they can walk away from it is if they cut off the funding. And if Trump does that, he'll be massively unpopular. He'll paint a target on his back. But he is the one that's capable of stopping it. Other than that, only China really can stop this conflict. Macron, anybody in the West are not trusted by Russia. And I had that from my Russian sources. So Trump is the only one they'll listen to.
Isn't it ironic? After all the attack and criticism he has, he can speak to Kim Jong-un, he can speak to Vladimir Putin. And to quote Winston Churchill, jaw is always better than war. Warren, I know we've got big things in the pipeline. Looking forward to talking with you about those too. Warren, thanks for being on the show. And with that, we're out of time.